There is a story so old it was told around fires 4,000 years ago, whispered from parent to child across 40 centuries, and it has never lost its power to comfort the ones who feel forgotten. It is the story of a boy who was betrayed by the people who should have loved him most, sold like a piece of property by his own brothers, carried in chains into a foreign land, thrown into a pit, and later into a prison for a crime he did not commit. A boy who had every reason to give up, to grow bitter, to let the darkness win. And yet this is not a story about how the world breaks a person. It is a story about a boy who was thrown down again and again, and who rose every single time, until the very brothers who sold him bowed at his feet, and the words he spoke to them became some of the most healing words ever recorded. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Tonight, you will hear all of it, slowly, gently, the way a story should be told to someone who is tired, and maybe you are tired. Maybe you have been carrying something heavy for a long time now, a betrayal that still aches, a season where everything seemed to go wrong, a dream that was taken from you, a night where sleep will not come because your mind keeps circling the same old wounds. If that is you, then this story was kept alive for you, for this night, for the person lying in the dark, wondering if the hard chapter they are living in will ever turn to good. So close your eyes now. You don't need to watch anything. You don't need to do anything at all. Let the weight of today go. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. You are safe here. Let this ancient story carry you. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Coat of Many Colors. Who was Joseph, this boy whose story has outlasted empires? Before we follow him down into the pit and across the desert into Egypt, we begin at home, in the tents of his father, in the green hills of a land called Canaan, nearly 4,000 years ago. Because to understand how far he would fall and how high he would rise, you first have to see the boy he was at the start, loved and favored, and perhaps a little too sure of himself. His father was named Jacob, a man who himself had known betrayal and exile and long years of struggle, a man who had wrestled with God in the dark of night and been given a new name, Israel. Jacob was old now, his beard gone grey, his body slowed by the years. And he had 12 sons, born to him over many long decades, through joy and sorrow both. But of all his sons, there was one he loved beyond the others. Joseph, the son of his old age, born when Jacob's hair was already turning silver. The son of Rachel, the wife he had loved most in all the world, who had died young, giving birth to Joseph's little brother. In Joseph's face, perhaps, Jacob saw the beloved wife he had lost. And so he loved this boy with a tenderness that spilled over and became visible to everyone. And Jacob did not hide his favoritism. He gave Joseph a coat, a beautiful, long-sleeved robe of many colors, richly made, the kind of garment a man of leisure would wear, not something meant for a shepherd sweating in the fields. It was a coat that said, without a single word, "This is my favorite son." And every time his 10 older brothers saw that bright coat, working their long days in the sun, while Joseph walked among them dressed like a prince, the resentment in their hearts grew a little colder, a little harder, a little more dangerous. Breathe. Let that settle into the quiet. And Joseph, young and perhaps unwise in the way of the young, did not make things any easier for himself. He had dreams, vivid, strange, unforgettable dreams, and he told them to his brothers without a hint of tact, without pausing to think how they might land on ears already burning with jealousy. He dreamed that they were all out in the field, binding sheaves of grain, and his sheaf rose up and stood upright, and all their sheaves gathered around his and bowed down low to it. And he told them so. "Are you going to reign over us?" They scoffed. "Are you going to rule over us?" And they hated him all the more. Then he dreamed another dream and told them that too. The sun and the moon and 11 stars were all bowing down to him. This time even his father frowned. And Joseph in his youth did not seem to notice the storm he was stirring. He simply spoke what he had seen. His brothers hated him for it. They could not speak a kind word to him. And even his father rebuked him gently. "Will your mother and I and your brothers really come and bow before you?" But the old book says something quiet and telling. His father kept the matter in mind. He wondered about it. He held it and waited. Rest here for a moment. Let that image stay with you. A boy in a bright coat full of dreams, surrounded by brothers whose faces have gone hard. Here is something to carry gently into the night. Joseph did nothing to deserve what was about to happen to him. Yes, he was young and unwise. Yes, the bright coat and the boldly told dreams stirred up trouble in a house already thick with rivalry. But no one deserves to be betrayed by their own family, stripped and thrown into a pit, sold like an animal to strangers. Being tactless is not a crime that earns a person slavery. Sometimes the hard thing that happens to us is not a punishment we brought on ourselves. Sometimes we simply find ourselves standing in the path of other people's wounds and jealousies and unhealed hurts, and we are struck by something that was never really about us at all. And if that has happened to you, if you have been hurt by people who should have protected you, hear this softly tonight. It was not because you were unworthy. It was not a verdict on your value. You are seen, you are known, and your worth was never in their hands to give or take away. Breathe slowly, let your shoulders drop, because the brothers' resentment was rising toward something terrible, and soon, out in a distant field, far from their father's eyes, they would act on it. Chapter 2. Sold by his own brothers. Have you ever been hurt by the very people who were supposed to keep you safe? If so, then this next part of the story will be hard to hear. But stay close, because it is the beginning of everything that follows, and there is grace hidden even in the darkness of it. One day the brothers had taken the flocks far from home, up to the grazing lands near Shechem, and then on toward a place called Dothan. And Jacob, the old father, wanted news of them. So he sent Joseph. "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks," he said, "and bring me word." And Joseph went, obediently, trustingly, wearing that coat, walking alone across the open country to find them. It was a long way. When he reached Shechem, they were not there, and a man found him wandering in the fields and asked what he was looking for. "My brothers," Joseph said, "do you know where they are grazing the flocks?" The man had heard them speak of moving on to Dothan. And so Joseph walked farther still, following after them, until at last he saw them in the distance and made his way toward them. But they saw him first. They saw that bright coat coming across the fields, unmistakable even from far off, and something dark and long buried rose up in them. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to one another, the word heavy with contempt. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits, and we will say a wild animal devoured him. Then we shall see what becomes of his dreams." Breathe deeply. Stay with me through the dark part. The oldest brother, Reuben, could not stomach murder, and he talked them out of killing him. "Do not shed his blood," he said. "Just throw him into this dry pit here in the wilderness." Reuben planned secretly to come back later and rescue the boy. So when Joseph reached them, they seized him, and they stripped that coat of many colors off his back, and they threw him down into an empty cistern, a deep, dry well cut into the rock, its walls too steep to climb. And then, this is perhaps the coldest detail in the whole story, they sat down to eat a meal. Their brother was crying out from the bottom of the pit, and they sat down to eat bread, as if nothing at all were wrong. Rest here for a moment. While they were eating, a caravan appeared on the horizon. Traders, Ishmaelites and Midianites, their camels loaded with spices, on their way down to Egypt. And one of the brothers, Judah, had an idea. "Why kill him and gain nothing? Let us sell him. He is our brother, our own flesh." And so they pulled Joseph up out of the pit, and they sold him, sold their own brother, to the traders for 20 pieces of silver. And the caravan carried him away, south, toward Egypt. toward a life he could not have imagined, 20 pieces of silver. That was the price of a slave. That was what his own brothers valued him at. Then they took the beautiful coat, the coat that had started it all, and they killed a young goat, and they dipped the coat in its blood until it was soaked and ruined. And they carried it back to their father and laid it before him and said, "We found this, look it over. Is it your son's robe or not?" And Jacob recognized it at once. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." And he tore his own clothes in grief and put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his other sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to the grave, still mourning my son." And so the old father wept, inconsolable, for a boy he believed was dead, while that very boy was alive, walking in chains along the dusty roads toward Egypt, farther from home with every step. Breathe. Let that grief be what it is for a moment, and then let it soften. Here is what I want you to hold on to tonight, in the middle of this dark chapter. Joseph did not know, as those camels carried him away from everything he had ever known, that this road, this terrible road of betrayal and slavery, was the very road that would one day save his entire family and a whole nation from famine. He could not see it. All he could see was the loss, the injustice, the pit behind him and the unknown ahead. Sometimes the road that feels like ruin is secretly the road to rescue. Not always, not in a way we can force or predict. But sometimes the very thing that breaks our heart is the beginning of a story we cannot yet read. You cannot see the end of your own story tonight, but you are not at the end. You are only in the middle. And the one who sees the whole road has not let go of your hand. You are not alone on this road. You never were. Breathe slowly. Let your breathing carry you toward rest, because the caravan reached Egypt. And Joseph, the favored son, was about to become a slave in a stranger's house. Chapter 3. A slave in Potiphar's house. What do you do when everything has been taken from you and you find yourself starting over with nothing in a place you never chose? That was Joseph's question now. The bright coat was gone. The father who loved him was far away, believing him dead. The dreams of grain and stars must have seemed like a cruel joke. He was a slave in a foreign land, where he did not speak the language, did not know the gods people worshipped, did not know a single friendly face. He was sold in the slave markets of Egypt to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh himself, the captain of the palace guard, a wealthy and powerful man with a grand estate. And Joseph, who had once worn a coat of many colors and been the favorite of his father's house, became one of many slaves in Potiphar's household, at the very bottom, owned by a stranger with no rights and no name of his own. Imagine the loneliness of those first days and nights. The strange sounds of a foreign tongue all around him, the unfamiliar gods carved on every wall, no mother, no father, no brother who wished him well. Just labor and silence and the long ache of everything he had lost. If anyone ever had reason to despair, to give up entirely, it was this young man, so far from home, remembering the coat and the dreams that now seemed like a cruel joke. Now here is where the story turns in a way you might not expect. Joseph did not sink into bitterness. He did not sabotage his master, or waste his days in resentment, or let the injustice of it all rot him from the inside. He had every reason to. No one would have blamed a betrayed and enslaved young man for giving up. But instead, he did the small, unglamorous work that was set in front of him. And he did it well. He served faithfully. He was honest and diligent and careful. He gave his best to a life he had never asked for. And the old book says something beautiful and simple, a line that will follow Joseph like a quiet melody through every hardship still to come. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. Even here, even as a slave in a foreign house, stripped of everything. The presence that had always been with him did not leave. He was not abandoned. He was accompanied, even in the place of his humiliation. Breathe deeply, Potiphar noticed. He saw that everything Joseph touched seemed to flourish, that this Hebrew slave was trustworthy and capable and wise beyond his years. And so, step by step, Potiphar promoted him. He put Joseph in charge of his household, then in charge of all his affairs, until finally Joseph managed everything Potiphar owned. The master trusted him so completely that he did not concern himself with anything except the food on his own table. A slave, running the whole estate of an Egyptian nobleman. Rest here for a moment. Let that quiet turnaround settle into you. Here is the lesson buried in this chapter, and it is one worth carrying into sleep. Joseph could not choose his circumstances. He did not choose to be sold or enslaved or carried to Egypt, but he could choose how he showed up inside those circumstances. He could choose faithfulness in the small things, even when no one from his old life would ever see it, even when it seemed to lead nowhere. And that is often how it is for us. We cannot always choose what happens to us. So much of life arrives unasked for, unfair, unchosen. But we can choose, in the narrow space that is left to us, to keep doing the next right thing with care, to be faithful in the small, hidden work. Not because it guarantees a reward. Joseph's faithfulness was about to be repaid with fresh injustice, but because faithfulness is its own kind of light in a dark place, and because the one who is with us sees it, even when no one else does. You are seen in your hidden faithfulness. You are known. Nothing done in the quiet is ever truly wasted. Let that sit for a moment. Breathe slowly. Because just as Joseph's life seemed to be finding solid ground again, a new storm was gathering in Potiphar's house, one that would send him falling all over again. Chapter 4. Falsely accused. Have you ever done the right thing, the truly right thing, and been punished for it anyway? There are few injustices that sting more deeply than that. To hold on to your integrity at real cost, and then to watch it cost you everything regardless. This is where Joseph found himself now, at the lowest and most bitter turn of his whole journey. Joseph had grown into a strong and handsome young man, capable and composed, and in time Potiphar's wife took notice of him. Day after day she pressed him, urging him to betray his master, to come and lie with her. It was not a single moment of temptation, but a slow and relentless pressure, wearing at him over many days, the kind of thing that grinds a person down. And day after day, Joseph refused. Think of what he was refusing. He was a slave with no power. She was the mistress of the house, who could make his life easy or unbearable. Giving in would have been the path of least resistance, and no one back home would ever know. But Joseph would not do it. How could I do such a wicked thing, he said, and betray my master, who has trusted me with everything he owns and kept back nothing from me except you? And how could I sin against God? He held his ground again and again against a temptation that grew heavier and more dangerous by the day. Breathe. Stay near through this part. And then one day, when the house happened to be empty and none of the other servants were near, she caught him by his cloak and demanded once more, pulling him toward her. And Joseph did the honorable thing, the hard and costly thing. He ran. He left his garment behind in her grasping hand and fled the house and got himself outside. He chose his integrity over his comfort. He chose the right thing, knowing it left him exposed, knowing she still held the very cloak that could be twisted into evidence against him. He did not stay to argue or bargain. He simply refused, and he ran from the wrong, and she used that very garment against him. Humiliated and enraged at being refused, she cried out to the other servants and then to her husband, twisting the truth into its exact opposite. She accused Joseph of attacking her, and she held up his cloak as proof. "Here is his garment," she said. "He fled and left it behind. Rest here for a moment. Feel the weight of it." Potiphar was furious, and Joseph, a slave, with no voice, no advocate, no way to prove his innocence against the word of his master's wife, was thrown into prison. The very thing he had refused to do, he was punished for, as if he had done it. His integrity had earned him a prison cell. Think of how that must have felt. He had been faithful in Potiphar's house. He had resisted real temptation at real cost. He had done everything right, and his reward was chains. If ever there was a moment for Joseph to shake his fist at heaven and say, "What is the point of doing good?" this was it. Betrayed by his brothers for being loved, now imprisoned for being righteous. Down and down and down again. Breathe deeply. Let that injustice be named, and then let it rest in the quiet. Here is what I want you to carry gently into the night. Doing the right thing does not always protect us from suffering. Sometimes integrity costs us. Sometimes the honest path is the harder one, and the world does not reward it the way we wish it would. And if you have paid a price for doing what was right, if your goodness was met with punishment instead of praise, then you are in very old and very good company tonight. But hold on to this too. Even in that prison, the story is not over. The old book adds one small, steady line that changes everything, and we will come to it. For now, simply know this: the pit was not the end. The slave market was not the end, and this prison would not be the end either. You are not at the end of your story tonight. You are only in a hard chapter of it. You are held even here. You are loved even now. You are safe. Rest now. Let your breathing slow. Because down in that Egyptian prison, in the dark, Joseph was about to meet two men whose dreams would change the entire direction of his life. Chapter 5. The dreams in the prison. Let me take you down into the prison now, into the dim light and the stone. You would expect a man in Joseph's place to be broken by now, betrayed by his family, enslaved, falsely accused, and locked away in an Egyptian dungeon for a crime he refused to commit. Anyone would understand if he simply gave up, if he curled into his own bitterness and waited to die forgotten in the dark. But the old book gives us that quiet, steady line again, the same one that has followed Joseph through every disaster. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison. He showed him kindness. And even there, in that dungeon, Joseph did what he always did. He served, he helped, he was faithful in the small things. And the warden of the prison came to trust him so completely that he put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. Breathe. Even in prison, Joseph rose to be trusted. Even at the bottom, his character shone. There is something almost stubborn about it, a man who simply would not stop being who he was, no matter how deep the pit. Now, two new prisoners were brought into that dungeon, two of Pharaoh's own officials who had fallen out of favor. The royal cupbearer who had once handed the king his wine, and the royal baker who had once prepared his bread. And one night, each of them had a strange and troubling dream, and in the morning their faces were dark with worry, because there was no one to tell them what the dreams meant. Joseph noticed. Even burdened with his own troubles, he noticed theirs. "Why are your faces so sad today?" he asked. And they told him, "We have each had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." And Joseph said something remarkable for a man in his position. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Rest here for a moment." The cupbearer told his dream first. "I saw a vine before me," he said, "with 3 branches. And as I watched it budded, and its blossoms opened, and its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into the cup and placed it in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph told him its meaning without hesitation. "The 3 branches are 3 days," he said. "Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand again, just as you used to do." It was good news, the best news the man could have hoped for. And then Joseph added quietly, one small and very human request. When all goes well with you again, remember me. Show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place. For I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing to deserve being thrown into this dungeon. It was the plea of a man who had held on to hope through everything, daring to believe that rescue might finally be near. The baker, hearing that his companion's dream meant good things, was encouraged and told his dream too. There were 3 baskets of bread on my head, he said, and in the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds came and ate them out of the basket on my head. But this dream carried a darker meaning. And Joseph, honest even when the truth was hard to speak, told it to him plainly and gently. And in 3 days, exactly as Joseph had said for each of them, it all came to pass. Pharaoh held a feast and restored the cupbearer to his place, and the cup was in his hand once more. The baker was not restored. Breathe, let that settle into the quiet. But here is the line that must have broken Joseph's heart. The cupbearer, restored to his comfortable place at Pharaoh's side, forgot all about him. He did not remember Joseph. He did not say a word. And so Joseph stayed in that prison, not for days, not for weeks, but for 2 more long years. Forgotten again, overlooked again, waiting in the dark for a rescue that did not come. 2 years. Imagine the slow ache of it, the hope that must have flickered up bright when he interpreted the cupbearer's dream. Surely now, surely help is coming, surely I will be remembered and set free. And then the waiting, a week, a month, a season, a year, and no word, no messenger, no rescue, just the same stone walls, the same dim light, the same long silence, while the man who could have spoken for him lived in comfort and never gave him a thought. If you have ever waited a long time for something to change, if you have been forgotten by someone who promised to help you, if a door of hope opened and then quietly closed again, if your prayers have felt like they were falling into silence, then you know something of those 2 years in Joseph's cell. It is one of the hardest things a heart can bear, not the sharp pain of a single blow, but the slow, grinding weight of waiting and wondering if you have been forgotten for good. Hear this softly tonight. The waiting was not wasted, though Joseph could not have known it. God was not idle in those 2 years. The timing that felt like abandonment was, in fact, being lined up with a moment that had not yet arrived, a moment when Joseph's rescue would mean the rescue of thousands. He was not forgotten by the one who mattered, even when he was forgotten by everyone else. You are not forgotten in your waiting. You are not overlooked by the one who sees. Breathe, and let that be true tonight. Because after 2 long years, the forgotten prisoner was about to be summoned before the most powerful man in the world. Chapter 6. Before Pharaoh's throne. Now we come to the great turning of the whole story. Stay with me, because this is the moment everything Joseph suffered begins to bend toward its purpose. 2 years after the cupbearer forgot him, Pharaoh himself, the king of all Egypt, worshipped as a god, the most powerful man on the face of the earth, had 2 dreams in a single night that terrified him and would not leave him. In the first, he was standing by the river Nile, and up out of the water came 7 cows, sleek and fat and healthy, and they grazed among the reeds. And then behind them came 7 more cows, gaunt and thin and ugly, the poorest cows he had ever seen. And these thin cows ate up the 7 fat ones, and yet remained just as thin and starved as before. And Pharaoh woke. He fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. 7 heads of grain, full and healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk, and after them sprouted 7 other heads, thin and scorched by the east wind, and the 7 thin heads swallowed up the 7 full and healthy ones. And Pharaoh woke again, and his spirit was deeply troubled, and he could find no rest. In the morning he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, the learned interpreters of the greatest kingdom on earth, and he told them his dreams. But not one of them could tell him what they meant. All the wisdom of Egypt stood silent before the king. Breathe deeply. And it was then, at last, that the cupbearer remembered. His memory stirred, and he stepped forward, ashamed. "I have been reminded of my failings today," he said. "There was a young Hebrew in the prison, a servant, and when the baker and I had dreams, he interpreted them for us, and everything happened exactly as he said. And Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once. Rest here for a moment. Picture it. They hurried him up out of the dungeon. He shaved, he changed his clothes, he was made ready to stand before the throne. This forgotten slave, this falsely accused prisoner, lifted in a single hour from the pit of the prison to the presence of the king. And Pharaoh looked at him and said, 'I have had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard that you can. And Joseph, and this is the heart of the man, the thing that made him who he was, did not seize the credit for himself. He did not stand a little taller and say, "Yes, I am wise. I can do this thing that all your magicians could not." Instead, he answered humbly, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he is looking for." Even now, lifted in an instant from the dungeon to the throne room, with everything to gain by claiming greatness, Joseph pointed away from himself. The years of suffering had not made him bitter, they had made him humble. Then he listened to the dreams, and he spoke. "The two dreams are one," he told Pharaoh. "God is showing you what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming to all of Egypt, and after them 7 years of terrible famine will follow, so severe that the abundance will be forgotten, and the land will waste away. The dream was given twice because the matter is firmly decided, and it will happen soon. Breathe. Let that settle." But Joseph did not stop at the warning. He offered wisdom. "Let Pharaoh appoint a wise and discerning man over the land," he said. "Store up grain during the 7 years of plenty, keep it under guard in the cities, and hold it in reserve for the 7 years of famine. So the land will not be destroyed when the hunger comes." And Pharaoh and all his officials saw that this was good. And Pharaoh looked at this young Hebrew who had spoken with such wisdom and humility, and he said the words that turned the whole story on its hinge. "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God? Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so wise and discerning as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Rest here for a moment and let the wonder of it wash over you. In a single day, Joseph went from a forgotten prisoner in chains to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. Pharaoh put his own signet ring on Joseph's finger, dressed him in fine linen, placed a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in the second chariot of the kingdom while people called out before him. The slave had become a ruler. The prisoner had become a prince. The boy in the pit now governed the greatest kingdom on earth. Here is the mystery worth carrying into your sleep. Every terrible thing that had happened to Joseph was, without his ever knowing it at the time, quietly preparing him for this exact moment. The betrayal by his brothers taught him to survive devastating loss. The years of slavery in Potiphar's house taught him to manage a great estate, to handle responsibility, to lead. The false accusation and the prison taught him endurance, and placed him in the one cell where he would meet the one man who could open the door to Pharaoh. Even the 2 forgotten years lined him up with the precise hour the king would dream and need an interpreter. Not one piece of his suffering was random. Not 1 year was wasted. All of it somehow, every pit and every chain, was being woven together into a purpose he could not possibly have seen while he was living through it. You cannot see tonight how the hard pieces of your own story might one day fit together, But the weaving is not finished. The threads that look tangled and pointless now may be forming something you will only understand much later. You are not held at the pit. You are being carried toward a purpose. Breathe deeply. Let that hope settle over you like a warm blanket, because the famine Joseph foresaw was coming. And when it came, it would drive 10 hungry men out of the hills of Canaan, down into Egypt, straight toward the brother they had sold. Chapter 7. When his brothers bowed. Now we come to the reunion, the moment the whole story has been reaching toward. Stay close, because this is where the wounds of the beginning are finally, tenderly healed. The 7 years of plenty came, just as Joseph had said, and the land brought forth abundantly. And Joseph governed wisely, traveling through all of Egypt, gathering up 1/5 of the harvest during each of those rich years, storing grain in every city until there was so much of it that he stopped keeping records, for it was beyond measure, like the sand of the sea. He married and had 2 sons, and named the first Manasseh, for God had made him forget his hardship, and the second Ephraim, for God had made him fruitful in the land of his suffering. And then the 7 years of plenty ended, and the 7 years of famine began, exactly as Joseph had foreseen. And the famine was harsh, and it spread far beyond Egypt into every surrounding land, into all the countries round about, including the hills of Canaan, where an old man named Jacob still grieved the son he had believed dead for 20 years. When the hunger grew severe, the people of Egypt cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh sent them all to Joseph, and Joseph opened the storehouses. Egypt had bread, while the whole world starved. And from every direction, hungry people came to Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. And Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. So he sent 10 of his sons, all but the youngest, Benjamin, down into Egypt to buy food, so the family would not starve. 10 brothers, the very ones who had thrown Joseph into the pit and sold him for silver. Now traveling the same road their brother had traveled in chains, on their way to beg for bread. Breathe. Feel the weight of what is about to happen. And they came before the governor of Egypt to buy grain. And they bowed down to him, their faces to the ground, 10 brothers, bowing low before the ruler who held their lives in his hands. And that ruler was Joseph. The sheaves had bowed, the stars had bowed. The dream the boy had told so long ago, the dream that had earned him their hatred, was coming true before his own eyes. But they did not recognize him. How could they? The brother they had sold was a teenage boy in a torn coat, weeping in the dust. This was a mighty Egyptian ruler in fine linen, speaking through an interpreter, holding the power of life and death. 20 years had passed. They had no idea they were bowing to the very brother they had betrayed. Rest here for a moment. Joseph recognized them at once. And what he must have felt in that moment, 20 years of grief and anger and longing rising up all together, we can only imagine. He had every right to take his revenge. He held all the power now. He could have destroyed the men who had destroyed his youth. No one on earth would have stopped him, but that is not what Joseph did. He tested them carefully over the course of more than one journey to Egypt, not out of cruelty and not to torment them, but to see whether their hearts had truly changed in the 20 years since the pit. He wanted to know whether these were still the men who could sell a brother into slavery, or whether they had become men who would now sacrifice themselves to protect one. He spoke to them harshly at first and accused them, and held one of them back, and demanded they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, Rachel's other son, Joseph's only full brother, down to Egypt. And all the while, Joseph could barely hold himself together. Again and again, he had to turn away from them and weep in private, overcome by the sight of the brothers he had grieved for half his life. He listened as they spoke among themselves, not knowing he understood their language, and heard them say to one another that surely all this was punishment for what they had done to their brother long ago. Their guilt had never left them. And when at last the moment of truth came, when Joseph arranged for Benjamin to appear guilty of a crime, and watched to see what the others would do. He saw everything he needed to see. He saw Judah, the very brother who had first suggested selling Joseph for silver, step forward and offer to become a slave himself, to stay in Egypt in chains forever, so that young Benjamin could go free and their old father's heart would not be broken a second time. The brother who had once sold a brother was now willing to be sold, to save one. They had changed, and Joseph could hold back no longer. He sent every Egyptian out of the room, and alone with his brothers, he wept so loudly that the whole household heard it. And he said the words that must have stopped their hearts. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? Breathe. Let that moment be as tender as it is." They were terrified, speechless. The brother they had wronged now held absolute power over them, and the reckoning they had feared for 20 years had come at last. But Joseph, and this is the summit of the whole story, the reason it has healed hearts for 4,000 years, did not speak a word of vengeance. He said, "Come close to me. Do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. It was not you who sent me here, but God." And then those words that have echoed down all the centuries since, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Rest here. Let those words wash over you slowly. He forgave them, fully, freely, holding nothing back. He fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and Benjamin wept on his, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and only then were they able to speak with him. And he sent them home with wagons and provisions to bring their father. And he brought his whole family, his aged father Jacob among them, and all their children and flocks, down to Egypt, and settled them in the best of the land, in a region called Goshen, and provided for them with bread through all the remaining years of the famine. The betrayed had become the rescuer, the one who was sold had become the one who saved. And old Jacob, who had torn his clothes in grief, believing his beloved son devoured by wild animals, lived to hold that son in his arms again. "Joseph is still alive," they had told him, and Jacob's heart nearly failed him for joy. And when the old man finally embraced the son he had mourned for 20 years, he said, "Now I can die in peace, for I have seen your face and know you are alive." This is why the story survived 4,000 years. This is the mystery they never stop telling, because it holds together two things we can barely hold together ourselves: that real evil was done. The brothers truly wronged him, and Joseph never once pretended otherwise, and yet that even real evil could be woven, by a hand higher than theirs, into a good that saved a nation. Both were true at once. The wrong was real, and the good was greater. You are held, even in the chapters that felt like betrayal. You are loved, even in the years that felt wasted. You are safe in the hands of the one who can weave even the worst thing into good. Breathe deeply now. The hardest part is behind us. Let the peace of the reunion settle over you. Chapter 8. Why this was written for you tonight. So here we are, at the end of the story and the end of the night. We have walked a long way together, from the tents of Canaan and a boy in a bright coat, down into a dry and empty pit, across a burning desert in chains, into the house of Potiphar, where a slave rose to be trusted, and then the false accusation and the slam of a prison door. Through 2 long-forgotten years in the dark, up before Pharaoh's golden throne in a single astonishing hour, and finally to that room in Egypt where the most powerful man in the land sent his servants away and wept aloud and said to the trembling brothers who had betrayed him, "I am Joseph." It is a story of 4,000 years, and of a faithfulness that reached all the way through betrayal and slavery and prison, to a reunion soaked in tears. And you might be wondering, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows, what does all of this have to do with me, lying here in the dark tonight? Everything. It has everything to do with you. Let me tell you gently before you sleep why this old story was kept alive for a night exactly like this one. Remember the pit. Joseph was thrown down through no fault of his own, betrayed by the ones who should have loved him. So if you have been hurt by people who were supposed to keep you safe, hear this. It was not a verdict on your worth. The pit others threw you into does not define you. You are not what the people who wronged you said you were. Remember Potiphar's house. Joseph could not choose his circumstances, but he chose faithfulness in the small, hidden work, even when no one who mattered to him would ever see it. So in whatever narrow place you find yourself tonight, remember that the quiet faithfulness no one applauds is never wasted. It is seen by the one who matters most. Remember the prison and the 2 forgotten years. Joseph did the right thing and was punished for it, and then waited in the dark far longer than seemed fair. So if you are in a long season of waiting, if you have been forgotten by someone who promised to help, if your hope has worn thin, know that the waiting is not the end of your story. The delay is not the same as abandonment. God was not idle in Joseph's 2 silent years, and he is not idle in yours. Remember the throne. Every hard thing Joseph endured turned out to be preparing him for a purpose he could not see while he was suffering it. So the tangled, painful threads of your own story may yet be forming something you will only understand much later. You cannot read the end of your story tonight. But you are not at the end. You are in the middle. And the weaving is not finished. And remember, above all, the words he spoke to his brothers when he had every earthly right to destroy them. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. This is the deepest comfort the whole story has to offer, and it is worth holding on to in the dark. Not that the evil against him was somehow not real. It was real and terrible, and Joseph never once pretended otherwise. Not that his pain across all those years did not matter. It mattered, every lonely night of it. But that even real evil, even deep betrayal, even years that seemed utterly wasted, are not beyond the reach of a God who can gather them up and weave them in time into something good and life-giving. Nothing that has been done to you, and nothing you have suffered, is too broken or too far gone for that patient hand to redeem. Breathe. Let all of it settle over you now, one truth at a time, like a warm blanket laid over you in the cold. Here is what I most want you to carry into sleep. The whole story, from the pit to the palace, is one long answer to the question you may be most afraid to ask in the dark. Is my hard chapter going somewhere, or is it just pain for nothing? And the answer, told over 4,000 years, whispered to every betrayed and forgotten and waiting heart that ever listened, is this. Your story is not over, and it is not wasted, and it is held in hands far kinder and far stronger than the ones that hurt you. You are seen, you are known, you are held, you are loved, you are safe, you are not alone tonight, you never were. Rest now. Let your breathing slow. Let the story hold you as you drift. Closing and prayer. We have walked with him. We have seen the boy in the coat, and the slave in chains, and the prisoner in the dark. We have stood in the throne room and wept in the reunion. We have watched a story that began in betrayal end in the tenderest of embraces. And through all of it, one truth has held steady, like a light left burning in a window. No pit is deep enough, and no waiting is long enough to put you beyond the reach of a good and faithful God. The very things that were meant to break Joseph became the making of him, and the same hand that carried him from the pit to the palace is near to you tonight in the quiet, closer than your own breath, weaving even your hardest chapter toward a good you cannot yet see. Let us pray. Father, we come to you at the end of this day, tired and small, and we thank you. Thank you for the story of a boy who was betrayed and forgotten, and whom you never once let go. Thank you that no pit is beyond your reach, no injustice beyond your sight, no waiting beyond your care. Thank you that you can take even the evil that is done to us and weave it in time into good. For the one lying here tonight carrying an old betrayal, or a long season of waiting, or a hard chapter that seems to be leading nowhere, I ask not that you explain it all, but simply that you be near. Be the presence in the pit, be the kindness in the prison. Be the one who remembers when everyone else forgets. Let them feel, even now as sleep comes, that their story is held in your hands, and that you are working quietly and faithfully toward a good they cannot yet see. Quiet every anxious thought. Loosen every knot of worry, and carry them gently down into rest. Amen. Sleep now, beloved. You are held, you are loved, you are safe. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you peace. This is your night psalm story, and we will walk with you again soon. Good night. Amen.